insight into this emerging illness and how we can keep our families safe this cold season is Dr. Frank Contessa, an internist at Custom Care Medical. Welcome to the show. They love to use these scary terms, and they love to make all of us think that, the next plague is upon us. Many, I think, back during COVID, we remember we had no flu season that year. So I think many people that thought they had COVID had the flu. And since COVID, it's been proven that a lot of the tests are very faulty to begin with. So how do parents really know?
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me. And, that was a great intro, and I'm so glad that you brought up that this white lung syndrome, white lung disease is not a real thing. It's not a real medical term. As you said, it's just a description of an X-ray. So parents need to watch out with this. And if your kids get sick, if they just have a routine cold, if they don't have a high fever, it's routine. Keep them home from school and keep them away from other people. But if the fever gets high and if it's persistent, or if they're having difficulty breathing, then you want to get them into the pediatrician. But there's really not a lot of need for concern or alarm right now. What we're seeing is really a seasonal increase in respiratory illnesses. There are some increases in mycoplasma pneumonia, that those outbreaks in those couple of states that you mentioned looks like something called mycoplasma pneumonia, which is actually fairly common. It responds to antibiotics. And there is a seasonal rise that we typically see. So there isn't a huge reason for concern right now.
I am seeing, doctor, and this is just totally anecdotal, here in Palm Beach. I have a lot of friends who've come down with a cold and then it's resulted in pneumonia. What can you do to prevent a regular cold turning into pneumonia?
Well, you can get secondary bacterial infections after a viral infection. And I know that most people understand that there's bacteria and viruses. The common cold is usually caused by a virus. And you can get a secondary bacterial infection that would require an antibiotic. There's not a lot you can do to prevent that from happening. You can supplement your immune system with things like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc are good things to take when you're ill. And even during this time of year when we see upper respiratory illnesses, it's not a bad idea to supplement those three things.
But also, I think it's important to note overuse of antibiotics. It's one of my biggest complaints about our current medical condition. People get antibiotics just because they have a cold. And antibiotics treat bacterial infections. They don't treat viruses. So we shouldn't take an antibiotic for a virus. But define for people when it is time to ask your physician for an antibiotic.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I very often in my practice have people come in, they've had upper respiratory symptoms for 2 or 3 days, and they say, "Hey, doc, can't you just call me in a Z-Pak and knock this thing out?" And I tell them, no, that doesn't really work that way. And to tell you the truth, there are high resistance rates with antibiotics, particularly something like Z-Pak or Zithromax, azithromycin, because it was overused. People walk into a walk-in clinic, an urgent care, and everybody walks out with a prescription for something because you feel like if you go to an urgent care and you don't walk out with the prescription, then what did I go for?
Yeah.
Typically, if you have symptoms for more than about a week, the rule of thumb is about a week. And if you're getting worse, after a week or so, if the symptoms are persisting, or before a week happens, if you're progressively worsening, if you're getting high fever, and if you're just clinically getting worse, then it's a good idea to get into your doctor and have somebody take a look at you.
Because that's more than likely a bacterial, what was viral turns bacterial sometimes and becomes a secondary infection. But also, if we overuse antibiotics, we become resistant to them. They don't work the next time we're sick. So it's very important not to take the antibiotic, not to request or pressure your doctor or your urgent care clinic to give you an antibiotic if indeed your symptoms aren't what you delineated, right, that they're getting worse and that you probably have a secondary infection, which consists of high fever, just going downward generally instead of getting better, because a Z-Pak isn't going to make a cold go away. Dr. Frank Contessa, really wise words and really important words, I think, for our society today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, you can never be too prepared. That's where the Wellness Company comes in, the medical emergency